We're in a place in culture and society where people talk about separating themselves from people that don't serve them. Well, you need to separate yourself from the version of you that's not serving you. And I say this in love, in love. Oh my gosh, ladies. So today's subject, I don't want to take forever on it. Listen, have you ever made a decision? Like you were just in a certain mood, right? You were in your feelings and you made a decision, you made a phone call, you did something, and you later on regretted your actions. And you're like, oh my gosh, why did I do that? Like, why did I make that decision? Or why did I call that person? Or why did I share that? Like, why did I do that? I want to talk about that piece right there in terms of the actions that you took, because so many times we're in a certain emotional state and we end up making an action that is against our best interest, or we end up doing an action that does not serve us, right? Well, how can you take that same thing, that same sequence, that same principle, and you actually tailor it in a way that serves you? That's what we're going to be talking about on today's episode. I want to talk to you about your emotional sequence and building an emotional sequence that's in your best interest. All right. So let's get into it. So today I'm going to do a more presentation style type of episode. So wherever you're listening to, you're definitely going to want to go to the YouTube channel if you're going to want to get the visuals to follow along with this. Okay. So as I said earlier, I want to talk to you about your emotional sequence. Your emotional sequence is what has you trapped in the circumstances that you're currently in, or has you feeling stuck, or has you feeling like you are stagnant. Your emotional sequence has more to do with that than the circumstance itself. So oftentimes as women, when we are in a certain place in life, we begin to say things like, if this situation outside of me were to change, then what's going on inside of me will as well. Now, is there some truth to that? Yes. But however, if your emotional state, if your mental state is 100% reliant on the circumstances that you're in, that means life is going to be in control of you. Because how many of you guys can agree that life be lifing, right? I love when people say that thing, life be lifing. So yes, life be lifing sometimes. And because life be lifing sometimes, you cannot allow what's going on in life to be the center of control for your emotions. So we have about 97 days, and I'm sure by the time I upload this videos, it's going to be less time than that. But we have about 90 plus days until we are in the last 90 days of the year. So I want you to understand there is so much you can get done in a 90-day time frame. Not just so much you can get done. There's so much amazing things that can happen in your life within that 90-day time span. And what I want to do today, or what I want to attempt to do today, is get you on the path to being aligned with that transformation. Now, if you're not familiar, one of the things that I speak about often is breaking that survival cycle. And because I talk about this so much, I created a guide to go with it. Okay, that's the 21-day faith-centered transformation guide. And this is to help you break that survival cycle. Now, with that survival cycle, if you've ever done the guide, or for you guys that are doing the guide, or if you're interested in doing the guide, there are journal prompts in there. And what the journal prompts do is it causes you to face a lot of emotions, thoughts, just things that are going on inside of you that is time to pour out. Now, this is where I want to get into the conversation about emotional sequence. We have to align our emotions with the outcomes that we desire in life. You have to align your emotions without the circumstances around you necessarily changing. As you begin to put one step in front of the other and prioritizing your emotions and prioritizing your emotional state, what you're going to begin to see happen is just the world around you is going to begin to change. So again, we become prisoners of our own emotions and prisoners in our life, because essentially we're saying, I'm going to continue to feel depressed, or I'm going to continue to feel anxious, or I'm going to continue to feel fear until ABCXYZ happens. I'm telling you, that's not the way you want to go about it. But what I'm going to do is like a short presentation for you guys so you can understand what it is that I'm saying. Okay, guys, so let's get into this emotional sequence, okay? So I'm going to use a quick whiteboard now because this is going to help me be able to do this much faster with you guys. So what I want to talk to you guys about today is your emotional sequence, okay? Because this is what you want to get control over, your emotional sequence. Now, your emotional sequence, for most of us, it is managed or it is ran by our open wounds. So our open wounds, right, or what some people will call your pain points, is essentially dictating our emotional sequence. So examples of open wounds that you may have may be you need to feel safe. It may be abandonment. It may be rejection. These are just examples, guys. It may be you need to be in control. It may be shame. It may be guilt. It may be, you don't want to be betrayed. You're fearful of that. Failure. You do not want to go through that. Right? So these are different open wounds that we may have. Well, what these open wounds do is they create a sequence. So for the sake of this example, let's use control. Okay. You have a fear of relinquishing control or someone else being in control. Now, let's say someone steps into the picture and they trigger against that. And now you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm losing control. Well, what's going to immediately happen is your emotional sequence is going to be enacted. So it's always going to begin with that trigger, right? Okay, so there's a trigger, and now the emotional sequence for control is enacted. So, what does that emotional sequence look like? Again, it's different from all of us, but this is kind of giving you an idea of what that may look like. So, here it is. I'm going through that. So, you might say, oh my gosh, wow, I do not feel safe right now. I need to be in control. That immediately you're going into fear, which is leading you, for example, into a panic. That panic is now leading you, let's say, into hypervigilance. Okay. That hypervigilance may now cause you to start pushing people away, and that might cause you to go into hyper independence. That hyper independence may lead to you're seeing that it's not working out, you're seeing there's a problem. You might even just move into avoidance. From that avoidance, for example, you may move into withdrawal. Okay, you know what? I'm not winning, or this is not working out how I thought I was going to do. It's time for me to withdraw from that situation. From withdrawing from that situation, here you go. You feel guilty. You feel shame. Now you're feeling guilty. You're feeling shame. Now you're upset by the fact, you're frustrated by the fact that you feel these emotions and these feelings. And then now you go into numbness. This is me giving you an example of this, okay? So this is the type of sequence, for example, that we may go through. This is the type of sequence that we may be dealing with. So what you want to do is you want to get in control of that emotional sequence. Because going from that fear to that panic to that hypervigilance, that avoidance, that withdrawal, that guilt, that frustration, and that numbness, if the situation that is triggering your control doesn't change, that means the sequence that you're going to remain in is going to be that sequence. And for so many of us, if you take proper inventory of your life, you're in an emotional sequence. It's one feeling that causes this feeling, that causes this feeling, that causes that feeling, that causes this feeling. But here's the thing, it's not just feelings, there are actions that follow along with that. So at the beginning of this episode, what did I speak about? Sometimes you're in a situation where you were feeling a certain kind of way and you end up making a decision. You're like, oh my gosh, why did I do that? Why did I do that? Because the emotional sequence that you were in, that emotional sequence led to you making a decision that ultimately you felt like was sabotaging you. Because when you look in hindsight, you feel like in a sober mind, that's not a decision that you would have made. Well, so many of us, we are currently being triggered. Our wounds are open. Our pain points are being impacted by whatever's going on in our circumstances. And we are in an emotional sequence that is continually cycling around. And the actions and the behaviors that we are demonstrating, they are all according to our emotional sequence. Let me tell you guys why this is so important. The reason, ladies, this is so important, and I want to address this, is because, as I said, we have 90 days before the year ends. And in those 90 days, how do you want to go into 2025? Are you waiting for the beginning of the year to start before you begin, saying, oh my gosh, it's time for me to do something, it's time to change my life, etc.? Or do you want to begin to work now? Because if you begin to work now, you can almost guarantee that you're going to have a phenomenal 2025, because you're already investing and you're already showing that you're not waiting on the motivation of the new year. Instead, you're already walking into a discipline that's going to support you. Because regardless of the fact, this version of you is going to need to be shed. So if you wait for 90 days to say, okay, I'll start shedding that version of me at the beginning of the new year, well, guess what? If it would take 90 days in order for you to shed that version of you, that means you're really not going to get started in this new year till March, because you're going to still have to begin the beginning of the year, shed that person, and then go into doing the things that you want to do to walk into that version of yourself, or that version of your life that you're manifesting and creating. So the emotional sequence that you are currently in, it currently has habits, because of the thoughts that are going on. It has habits, it has behaviors, it has actions that it's taking that is counterproductive to what you say you desire in life. The emotional sequence that you're in is counterproductive to what you desire. So you have to be intentional. It's so funny. We're waiting on our circumstances to change in order for our emotions to change. But we have to change our emotions in order to change the circumstances. It's the paradox of life. We will literally go through a trauma. The trauma impacts us. And then if we want to change the impact the trauma had on us, we have to first change internally, then go out and change externally. It's literally the cycle of life. So whatever experience you had, I understand that the initial impact is what put you to the state that you're in. But now you have to take control. You have to take authority. And now you have to say, no, this thing right here, I'm not going to let it ruin me. I'm not going to let it control me. Instead, I'm going to walk into a new sequence. I am going to take control of the sequence I'm in. And let me tell you something. I love, when people talk about that rose that grew out of concrete. So many of us, the situation that you're in right now may actually feel like concrete. It may feel rough, tough, hard, right? It hurts when you fall on it. It might be a very painful, very rigid just situation, right? It may feel like it's suffocating you in its own way. But what I want you to understand is when you decide to bloom, one of my favorite quotes is bloom where you are planted. If you decide to bloom despite of where you're at in life, what you are going to see happen is as your beauty begins to come forth, meaning that transformation and that light that's within you, what is going to happen, the same thing that would happen in life. If we walked by the concrete and we saw a rose that was showing out of the concrete, 99% of us are going to pluck it. 99% of us are not going to leave a rose there. Why? Because number one, we already feel like the rose doesn't belong there. And because we already feel like the rose doesn't belong there, we're already going to want to and feel empowered to remove it from the environment that it's in and place it in an environment that we feel like is better suited for. We might want to place the rose in our home. We might want to go home and put it in a garden. We might want to gift it. We're going to want to do something else with that rose, especially if we see it in concrete, because we feel already within our hearts that the rose doesn't belong there. When you decide to bloom where you are planted, your circumstances are naturally going to change, because just nature of life and the way that it works, when you decide to bloom into who you are, that woman that God has inside of you, it's naturally going to reject you staying in an environment that is not conducive for your growth. God himself, Elohim, will move you. He will place you in the right garden, but you have to take initiative and you have to have a desire and a willingness to begin to bloom from where you are planted. Now, the way you're going to do that is by being intentional about your emotional sequence. Right now, what's controlling your emotional sequence is that circumstance. The circumstance that you're currently in is where your emotional sequence is being driven from. So what you're going to have to do is now begin to put a series of habits and behaviors in place that are now moving towards a different emotional sequence, one that's in alignment with helping you get to where it is that you desire to be. Essentially, it's like laying the tracks. A train is on its way, and now you're laying the tracks to make sure that it's able to make it to its destination. So what does laying that track look like? That looks like gratitude in the morning. That looks like meditation. That looks like visualizations. That looks like reading your word. That looks like spending time with God. It looks like inspired action. It looks like taking that action, getting inspiration from the Holy Spirit on what it is that you need to do for the day and how you need to approach your day. And then once you get that inspiration, actually going out there and doing it. It looks like slowing down. It looks like allowing yourself to romanticize your relationship with God despite what's happening around you, trusting that you have a Father who has you. He got you. It looks like surrender. It looks like trust. And we end up staying in this emotional sequence that is not serving us, that is not beneficial to us, is not favorable, is not advantageous. We end up staying in that emotional sequence because we simply lack trust and we lack surrender. But if you decided to walk in surrender and walk in trust, then guess what? Then you can now welcome a better emotional sequence. Now, let me tell you this. Whether your situation changes or not, I can tell you one thing, the emotional sequence you're currently in, if it's fear, anxiety, depression, guilt, shame, all of that, that emotional sequence that you're in, I can tell you this, that it is definitely not going to change that circumstance. If our emotions, which is what I'm simply arguing here, has the power to change our circumstance, I can assure you that the emotions that you're walking in right now, that you're living in right now, it is not going to change your circumstance. If anything, it is going to hinder you. If anything, is going to keep you trapped in that circumstance even longer because it becomes this vicious cycle that's feeding itself. So we want to stop the cycle. We want to break the survival cycle. It's a survival cycle. And the way you do that, one, the 21-day faith-centered transformation guide, that's why it was created. It takes 21 days to break a habit. So if you're in a negative habit, a negative loop, right, of these negative emotions, then you'll want to get into that guide and do that guide as many times as you have to, by the way. But in that 21 days, really walk through these emotions so you can just deal with them and filter them and really bring them to the Lord and allow the Holy Spirit to walk you through that process of healing those inner parts of yourself, so that you can enter into a state of mind, a state of being where you can be in a more positive emotional state. So your emotional sequence is going to be key. Having a positive emotional sequence that aligns with the vision of the woman that you are saying God called you to be, the woman that has the lifestyle that you are saying that you desire, your heart's desire. You have to align your emotions, your habits, and your behaviors, okay, with the patterns of someone that is essentially manifesting that. And right now, we oftentimes feel so far away from what we desire because number one, our emotional state is not in alignment. And when our emotional state is not in alignment, is because our thoughts are not in alignment. And if our thoughts and our emotional state are not in alignment, then our actions are not in alignment. So you have the vision in your mind's eye of what you desire and what it's supposed to be like and feel like. However, you're in a sequence that is completely misaligned with the desires of your heart. So you need to get into a sequence that supports you. Once you get into the sequence that supports you by changing your emotions, how do you do that? You change your thoughts. Well, how do I change my thoughts if my reality is not changing? You begin to speak truth to yourself. You begin to declaring God's word over yourself. You begin to allow yourself to believe it. You spend that intimate time with God and you allow the Holy Spirit to build up your confidence in God's word, that he is not a man that he should lie. You allow that confidence to be built up day in and day out, not just on Sundays, right? You get preached this nice message that makes you say, oh my gosh, God is coming through. Yay. And then after that, Monday through Saturday, you're in this negative emotional sequence. No, you are intentional every single day at the top of the morning of making sure you are fueling yourself up. When you go along a lot of these construction roads and people that do, hard labor, one of the first things they do at the beginning of the day is they stop at the gas station. You've probably seen them. They stop at the gas station, they fill up their work trucks, they get their snacks, they do everything they need to do, right? And then they fuel up themselves and then they're on their way for the workday. What does your fuel up look like every day? What does your fueling up process looks like? Because you need to fuel up your emotional sequence to support you. If not, you are going to naturally autopilot, default to that place where your emotional sequence is working against you, which means your thoughts and your behaviors are working against you. Because in order for you to arrive at the place God has for you, it's a series of actions. What if it takes 10,000 steps, 10,000 actions, 10,000 small instructions of obedience to arrive at where God is calling you? They say it takes 10,000 hours, right, to master something. Let's say it's 10,000 steps, 10,000 following God's instruction that's going to allow your major breakthrough to happen. I'm just using this as an example. Now, when you're in that emotional state of fear, etc., let's say it takes you 3 months, 2 years just to do that one action step. So now if you're constantly, for every step that you take, you're in this place of like, oh my gosh, nothing happened, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You're in a negative loop. So what happens is you need to allow yourself to be so surrendered that you're taking these action steps. And even if like overnight, the success or whatever it is that you desire doesn't happen, you're still trusting your Father. Because I'm telling you, even if that magnificent thing or that miracle, or whatever it may be that you desire to happen overnight did not occur, going to an emotional sequence that is counterproductive isn't going to help you. So being in a positive emotional sequence is not just beneficial for the outcome and the desire that you have in transforming your situation. It's beneficial for your mental health. It's beneficial for your mental health. And that's what we want to focus on, making sure you have a solid mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, guys. And this is going to include your physical and your financial. We're talking holistically here, a full-blown transformation. And I'm telling you, you are going to have to pay attention to your emotional state. And when you recognize your emotional sequences, what now happens is when you begin to feel feelings like overwhelm or you begin to feel fear, once you begin to notice and once you start to take inventory and you have that self-awareness, like, hold on, wait, this is a negative emotional sequence about to begin, then you can begin to put self-care practices in place that puts you into the emotional sequence that supports you, because the emotional sequence you're in right now is simply not supporting you. And I'm going to say this to really paint the picture. I want you to imagine airplanes when they're landing. You know how there's that whole landing strip out there that has the lights on it, and then there's the people that have the lights and they're like, come on, come this way, plane, come this way. Whatever circumstance you're in right now, let's say it feels dark, okay? You feel like you don't know what's going on, you feel confused, etc. God has the answers, he has the solution, he has everything for you. That is the plane. That is the plane that has the provision that it is that you need. Now, the provision, it could be answers, it could be relationships, it could be connections, it could be an open door, it could be anything. But that plane is trying to land. Now, everything around you is dark. When you go into those dark emotional sequences, that fear, that judgment, that shame, that guilt, etc., it's the equivalent of you shutting off all of the lights while that plane is trying to fly through. And then all of a sudden, now you might have one spark, and then you might open the light. And then after that, you shut it. And then you go to church on Sundays, and then you might shut it, right? That plane is circling around, is gone back, etc. So when you are allowing yourself to manifest that thing and you believe, right, that you're aligning yourself with it, you have to be intentional about keeping the lights on. You want those lights so bright that the plane is like, sheesh, wow. From the air, they're like, what an airport. What a welcome. You want to welcome the blessings. You want to welcome the abundance. You want to welcome what you are saying and what you are declaring God has for you. So you want to do the inner work inside of you. And that inner work that you're doing inside of you mentally and emotionally is signaling like, wow, what a welcome. Abundance is happy to be a part of your life. Love is happy to be. First of all, you're already loved. Know that. But joy is happy to be amongst you. You are saying, I am doing all of this work because that's how serious I am about being in the company of joy, of love, of abundance, of appreciation, all of this. This is how serious I am about this is the company that I desire to keep. I am encouraging you today. I'm imploring you to prioritize your mental health, prioritize your emotional health, and do the work that's necessary to change your emotional sequence. And the 21-day faith-centered transformation guide is designed to help you break that survival cycle. Now, I do have a phenomenal community that I'm building here, the Divinely Empowered Woman. That community, we're on Facebook. It's ladies that are doing this challenge and are taking the time to pour into themselves and really break free from that survival cycle. So that's an added benefit of that. There is a community that's available to you. But even if you don't join the community, because there's a lot of ladies that simply don't, they do the guide personally, which is perfectly fine. Regardless, there is a tool, there is a resource there to help you begin to break that survival cycle and get out of that negative sequence. And you have to be intentional about it. This guide is the beginning. It's helping you get launched into breaking that cycle. But you're going to have to learn yourself, and it's going to help you do that. But you're going to have to learn yourself and take inventory of yourself so you can stay out of those cycles. And you don't want your whole life to be about staying out. You want your life to be about moving towards what loves you back, moving towards the love of God, moving towards that safety, that provision, everything that He promises. And you want your day-to-day walk, the things that you do, to allow that to just permeate through you. So I'm going to be talking about emotional sequences a lot more, because that's one of the big things that needs to be broken, because you have to break the pattern. The pattern, mental pattern, is creating certain emotional sequences, and it's a vicious cycle that you need to get out of, because it's not going to help you become the best version of yourself, that higher version of yourself, the one that truly can take claim to that inheritance and everything, that abundance, everything that God has for that individual. You're going to have to break away from that version of you that is trying to oppress you and suppress you. It simply doesn't serve you. We're in a place in culture and society where people talk about separating themselves from people that don't serve them. Well, you need to separate yourself from the version of you that's not serving you. And I say this in love, in love. So with that being said, ladies, if you haven't gotten it already, it's linked in the description, 21-day faith-centered transformation guide. Now, this is a part of the Beauty for Ashes program, which is a larger program. It's a workshop. And that workshop, this guide is the aftercare piece. So if you want to take the workshop, you can. But nonetheless, begin the process of breaking that survival cycle at bare minimum with the guide. And those journal prompts, 3 to 5 per day for the next 21 days, is going to help you. It's going to help you cycle through things like acceptance, releasing, forgiving, all of these things. Okay. So I love you, ladies. I appreciate you. You know, if there's anything that you guys want me to talk about in the next episode, please drop it below in the comments. I'll take a look at it, and, you know, I'll try to plan my future episodes accordingly. So with that being said, guys, remember, you're going to break out of that survival cycle. We have, 90 something days left until the year ends. So that last 90 days, you can do some powerful things with it if you take full advantage, which I'm counting on you to do that. So that being said, y'all have a wonderful day. I love you. Talk to you soon. Bye.